Welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday. It is another episode coming at you live all the way from Washington DC, from Canada, and I think from Aotearoa. Although I could be wrong because time zones be time zoning. But this is Real Talk with Emoji and Ra. Mental health sounds like this. What's going on, Rawinia? Talk to me. How's your week been?
It's actually been quite full, if I'm being honest. But I've been really looking forward to this conversation today. And I want to say catching up with Kieran. Kieran's, I want to say, like a good friend. We met a while ago in Bali through a mutual friend. And yeah, I love everything that he does. I think he's such a great example of what it means to be open and vulnerable around your mental health and mental health journey. And I think he's a great leader when it comes to that space. So I'm just excited for today.
That's awesome. Before we bring Kieran on, you mentioned about Bali because you've been in the coaching space now for a little bit longer than I have. And you specifically went to Bali a few years ago to like really lean into your purpose and your why, which is where you met Kieran. Can you tell everybody like a little bit more about that, and so that people know, kind of have a bit more schema behind how the relationship with Kieran began before we embarrass him and bring him onto the stage?
In complete honesty, starting my coaching business was something that I had put off for such a long time. And I really felt like it wasn't something that I could do at home in New Zealand, which seems like such a shame given tall poppy syndrome and how judgmental people can be. And so going to Bali was an opportunity for me to really ground into who I am, my purpose, my why, and to really start fresh in a different place to be able to see things in a different way. And I'm really grateful for the mutual friend that Kieran and I had. She introduced us and said, hey, I think you two will get along. And it's been great. We've seen each other off and on over the years, usually in many different places in the world. And so, I'm really grateful to know him.
It's funny that you say that because, tall poppy syndrome being a thing in New Zealand, in DC, it's called crabs in a bucket, where like if a crab tries to get out of the bucket, every other crab tries to bring them down. So I'm really excited to learn more about two crabs that maybe help people. How are you feeling, Kieran? Are you feeling crabby today?
Oh my gosh.
Ladies and gentlemen, please introducing Kieran Hedley. How you doing, bub?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I was just saying that I'm feeling pretty crabby, so I'm ready to go. Yeah, I'm feeling like a tall poppy.
Well, don't worry, you're not in a space where we're not gonna cut you down. I promise. We'll drag you back into the bucket.
I know you will. I know you will. That's right.
Cool. So I know that we were having a bit of a chit chat before we came on live today, and I know that you and Ra have had this beautiful friendship for a long time. But I'm sort of coming into this a little bit blind, except that I know that you are both an anxiety coach and you are a student in neuroscience, which totally lights my my brain up on fire. Given that you and I have a shared history of TBI. Tell me, sir, have you also got hydrocephalus? I know you don't, but what's your story behind getting into neuroscience?
Well, part of it being the interest coming from the angle of anxiety. So in my earlier years, struggled with major depression. So especially, school time leading up into university time, had this chronic depression. It was seemingly seasonal, but honestly, now that I, in hindsight, can recognize there was sort of like this ongoing depressive sense that was there. It would just increase, at certain periods where for months on end, I'd just be in this really low, dark period where, existing felt almost pointless. From there, it started to develop into anxiety, panic attacks, and so forth. And although I was already meditating, I started to develop an interest in the brain. Like, why is my mind doing this? Why do I feel this way? Right? Why is my mind ruminating about these thoughts that I think I shouldn't be thinking about? And so I started to develop an interest in it, just started listening to podcasts to start with, right? Then I started to do my own research, looking at different papers and journals. I didn't really understand science too well. So, I was sort of trying to follow my own bias, to be honest, at the time.
Yeah, I think we all do that at some point, right?
Like meditation's the best thing in the world, right? Like, because I was just such a big meditator then. And of course, now I'm actually doing a qualification and a Bachelor of Science, majoring in neuroscience. And so it's a very neuroscience focused major. And it's just honestly feeding that love for neuroscience there. But of course, leading up to that, I suffered concussions, which has led to what I have now, which is called post-concussion syndrome, which means that it's just ongoing symptoms of what someone would experience with a concussion. A concussion being, when someone has a head knock, sometimes they can suffer whiplash, but there's enough G-forces, that person can suffer a concussion where the brain, because it's sort of held up in space in the head, I don't know if people really understand this, but it's quite literally like this jello that's just sitting in the head. And what tends to happen is it can move around with the movements that we make in space. But what ends up happening is, of course, if we come to a sudden halt, it's similar to like in a car crash when a person keeps flying forward, but the car stops, right? The brain keeps flying forward and then crashes into the front of the skull. Oftentimes there's a tearing of neurons, quite literally like a tearing and breaking of these wires in our brain. And that leads to these symptoms like what I had, which was an inability to create speech for about a week very well. Like things like confusion, things like forgetfulness, headaches, just constant headaches. And I honestly still get this years later because I've just had quite a few concussions now. So.
Was that from playing sports, or where did the concussions come from?
So 2 from rugby, 1 from horse riding when I was really young. I had 1 from snowboarding, and then my final one was from a car crash, which I was a passenger in, and that was the one that really set off the ongoing symptoms that I have now.
Jeepers. I'm so sorry. I know that you have a question, Ra. You're reminding me of I have a factoid for you. This might, because, I surround myself with a lot of neuroscience doctors and people with master's degrees here in the DC area. And I found out something really interesting recently. Do you know that the highest sport, the sport that has the highest rate of concussions in the world is jet skiing?
Interesting.
No way. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. That's why I was like...
That does make sense. Yeah.
Isn't that fascinating? So, horseback riding, yes, I get you, but jet skiing.
Sorry. You're making an assumption that it's rugby, because it's something that you hear of quite often in the sport of rugby, especially from New Zealand, right?
Yeah. But no, worldwide jet skiing. Watch yourself, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
That's I can relate a lot to what you're talking about. Not in the sports sense. I wasn't allowed to play rugby when I was a kid because of my neurodiversity and brain issues. But the headaches, the lack of memory, the lack of ability to make speech, it's amazing how much of an impact the brain has, and how different it is between people. So I'm excited to dig in. Over to you, Ra. Passing the ball.
Oh my gosh, I love all the metaphors. You're so great at them. Kieran, can you tell us like a little bit more about like how you have like navigated this, like I would say like recent experience like with the car crash, running a business, like the things that you do. I know that you enjoy running, with your study. Like, how have you navigated this experience, and like what's really supported you with your own mental health and well-being during this time?
I mean, great question. There's a lot to unpack. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. So firstly, my meditation practice has been quite ongoing for many years. I'd say I started when I learned about my major depression that I was struggling with. And that would have been around 2016, roughly. So honestly, like almost 10 years now, I think I've been quite consistent with meditation, even though it's quite basic at the start. And just having that practice of some sort of self-regulation, some sort of self-awareness practice on it, like on most days, it would just help me to understand where I was at least, so that I could then navigate based on that. Oftentimes I didn't like it, so there'd be a lot of judgment. I didn't realize I was judging myself for a lot of that and sabotaging the way I was, the way I thought, how I felt. It would happen quite often. But over the years, I'd say that's probably been one of the biggest foundations. I worked with a lot of therapists and counselors over that time. It definitely helped. Didn't help me get to the underlying cause so that I could actually start working and chipping away at the roots. But it did help me with a lot of the symptoms and also my situations. The thing that I think made the biggest impact of all was probably actually, funnily enough, working with a coach. I worked with a coach I worked with a few coaches, but one in particular for 3 years. And over those 3 years, it was just having that accountability and support to not just talk to someone over that course, but actually work and chip away at some of the root causes together as a team. And that for me was honestly probably the most helpful of all of those things, which is one of the reasons why I became a coach myself, to be able to offer that kind of support that's maybe different from traditional therapy.
I think it's really, and there's still at least in America, I don't know if it's the same in Aotearoa or Dubai or wherever else in the world, but there's still a lot of pushback against asking for help, specifically for men. Therapy, yes, that's been the story as old as the age of time. But when it comes to coaching, I've found that there seems to be a lot of sort of just dis-ease around feeling as if you're less than when it comes to recognizing, that need for help, recognizing that we can't necessarily do this alone, nor should we. We are social creatures. How did you navigate that space when you started seeking help?
Well, lucky for me, in my family, there was already a counselor that would help members of our family. And so my parents actually gave me a good nudge when they found out I was going through a hard time. I didn't say it. I didn't show it, except for the fact that I didn't want to talk to my parents. I didn't want to interact with them. They thought it was just a teenage phase, but really what was happening is I was coming home from school, overwhelmed by this face that I had to hold for the whole day, right? Kieran, Mr. Nice Guy, right? Keiran, like the social butterfly who, was never happy being that, but I felt like I had to be a certain way to fit in or be liked or be enough, right? That was a big one. I'd come home and I'd just be drained trying to be this character of Keiran. And so I'd just want to go straight to my room, hide in a dark room and watch my anime, escape reality. It was just, honestly, I just thank my lucky stars that my parents just gave me that nudge. I was going through a breakup at the time with my high school girlfriend, right? And they're like, hey, go see this counselor. And I reluctantly said, okay. But I noticed she was helping me to feel a little bit lighter at the end of the sessions. I didn't know what it was. I'm like, wow, actually talking about this helps. Surprise. And from there, it just started a little bit of a snowball effect, I suppose, where I started talking about it a little bit more, I suppose, just in my close circles, not in a big way, just, a brief mention here and there, especially once my doctor diagnosed me, right, with depression. And I'd say the big thing, honestly, was when one of my best mates at the time took his own life. And when he did this, because of anxiety, it honestly sparked a motivation in me to start being more open about it and vocal about it. Another part of the reason why I started in the coaching. And so honestly, I thank him and bless him for the inspiration that he gave me, even though it was through, unfortunate means. He really gave me a lot of inspiration to go on the path that I'm on now.
Gosh. Yeah, it's so sad that something like that can be, I suppose like the trigger for someone to be able to kind of open up and be more vocal. But at the same time, like you say, it's such a blessing. And I can really relate in my own journey because I've lost multiple friends during like my late high school, kind of early 20s to suicide as well. And that was a big part of the reason why I went down the path that I've gone down as well. in terms of like learning more about psychology, the brain, why we behave the way that we do. You spoke about judgment earlier, and that self-judgment that you've often found yourself in, and this persona, like you spoke about the character of Kieran, right? And again, I can relate because I've done that many times in my life. I'm sure many people can.
So relatable. So relatable.
I know, right? Yeah. Like, what's your advice to anyone listening, be like whatever gender they are, as to like, what would you suggest to them to start to kind of overcome that self-judgment and to show up as themselves fully without kind of putting on this like mask of who they think they should be?
Well, firstly, I can only offer my perspective and my experience. So don't take this as advice. Take this as just simply, someone sharing their own experience. But something that I think a lot about is a quote from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Have you guys seen it?
I see you on the anime thing. Okay.
Yeah. My favorite character is always Uncle Iroh, right? And there's this whole conversation he had with Zuko, right? So this like old this banished prince, right? And like Prince Zuko is like distraught. He's just so angry, and Uncle Iroh says something like, "Prince Zuko, calm down. You don't need to be ashamed," I think he said. And then Zuko goes, "What do you mean shame? I'm as proud as ever." And then Iroh goes, "Prince Zuko," it's his wise voice, wise old man voice. "Pride is not the opposite of shame, but it's sauce." Like, I know, right? And it's like super wise. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And oftentimes what I'd find I'd do with this shame, because shame honestly led to a lot of the self-sabotage and judgment of who I was, how I felt a lot of the time. And it also bred into a lot of my anxiety, like this fear of feeling shame again, right? And that shame could come through rejection or being told I didn't do well enough or not getting the result I hoped for, and I'd feel that shame again, right? And so that anxiety led sort of bred into that a lot. And circling back to that quote, I feel like I was trying to be proud of myself a lot of the time. So I was chasing this pride, but that chasing of pride or being proud of myself was in response to this fear of feeling shame. And so, hearing that quote sort of helped me to circle back and realize, and the next part of the quote is something like, the only true antidote to shame is humility, and, learning humility for myself, and being okay with that and being okay with who I was. And that leads into this idea of being self-accepting. People throw around this idea of accepting oneself a lot, but it really is, as cliche as it is, the thing. But how does one do that? And for me, that was just learning to be able to sit without reacting to the judgment that was already there, but sit with that judgment that was there in something like meditation for me, right? As that arose, when these patterns of judgment arose, let's just say from a past experience that I'm ashamed of, I would feel that shame boil up in me, and it would be painful. I would suffer it, but it's a form of graded exposure that they talk about in psychology, right? This flooding, which is where you saturate someone in exposure, or there's graded exposure where maybe you bring up something, you feel the emotion of it. You're not facing it head on, but it's there, and you're learning how to regulate yourself whilst experiencing it. And over time, it settles. And what I'd find is, as I'd go through practices of that, I would then find that in the real world, I'd be less afraid of shame because I've interacted with it. I've learned how to regulate myself around it. And that would over time would start to become something I can work with more easily in the real world as well. Yeah. So I'd say, learning how to sit with a thought or a feeling, even if it's just for a minute to start with, in a guided meditation or something. And then over days or weeks, learning how to maybe expand that to 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And over time, I can become more comfortable with working with feelings and thoughts like that. I'd say that's what's worked for me.
I love that. It's funny because my husband is a huge fan of The Last Airbender and everything Marvel.
Legend.
And as you're talking about these things, it makes me giggle a little bit because I'm like, there's so many underlying messages in those kind of mediums that people, often they're digesting them, but they're not really like mentally aware of what it is they're watching necessarily. I don't know if you're familiar with Moon Knight, the Marvel series. That
No.
was another fantastic show that really dug into the psyche of disassociative characterization, and the psychology behind that show is phenomenal. The reason I'm bringing that up is because one of the things that my husband and I often talk about, we run a self-defense school, and
Amazing.
as a singer songwriter and songwriting coach, it's funny, music and self-defense don't really have a relationship, but they really do. Because as you're talking about this, one of the things that we often talk about in the self-defense realm is you can't beat an enemy if you refuse to face the enemy. And so when I'm talking about songwriting with my clients, it's very much around the same thing. You can't beat or overcome an emotion if you refuse to give yourself permission to sit in and live and feel that emotion and put a name to it. And, you talk about meditation. For me, meditation's like that conversation with God when it's like, okay, so what's the path forward for me now? Let's write that into a song. What a lot of my clients and a lot of the students that my husband work with struggle with, however, is that permission to be vulnerable with self, and that permission to sit in the muck, and that ability. I mean, yes, meditation is definitely something that we all talk about in the when I have time, kind of sphere. How do you encourage, or how do you support your clients to feel comfortable enough to sit in that space, whether it's to feel their emotions or to let go and just analyze and notice the thoughts as they come up? What's the practice that you kind of advocate for best?
Sure. It's a great question as well, and I actually love talking about this. So firstly, it's understanding that meditation is not just a word for sitting down and chanting right? Or
Is it really?
Yeah. So there's a lot of misconception around meditation. A lot of the time it can be thought as like a religious practice or practice of worship, even though, to a fellow meditator, it's very clear it's none of that, right? It's just a practice of insight. It's a practice of self-awareness, simply put, right? And so when someone's doing a form of journaling or yoga, right, that is actually a form of meditation. It's just a little bit more surface level, right? And when I say surface level, that's not a bad thing. It just means there's not an opportunity to actually sit still and watch as some of those things arise, right? It's more open-eyed, right? Or sometimes with eyes closed, someone might recognize some of those things. With meditation, right, in terms of the actual more cliche term for what meditation might be, someone might sit cross-legged and straight up, just remain awake. Because it's pretty easy to start falling asleep, if you're not used to sitting down with your eyes closed. And so the idea with sitting upright is just keep yourself at least to some level of awareness and awakeness, so that you can actually scan and take out the visual stimuli of the world, the inner world, right? So by blocking out some of the external world, we can start to be aware of what's happening within, right? So thought patterns, emotional patterns, and so forth. And so I, of course, a bit of a science geek. And so there were a couple of fantastic studies and I find just talking a little bit about what happens in the brain can sometimes encourage people to maybe take some of those steps. Like there was a study by a guy called Hotzel and colleagues, right? This is in 2011. Basically, there were changes in the brain they noticed on an MRI scanner, right? So MRI scanner, basically, they sort of put these people into this machine and you could see what was happening in the brain. And over an 8-week period, right, just 8 weeks of people doing about 27 minutes of mindfulness practice. And this didn't even have to involve just meditation, right? This was like yoga or just gentle self-awareness, right? Breathing exercises, very simple things. And they noticed changes in parts of the brain that helped people to be more emotionally aware, more coordinated with their thoughts and their feelings. I've actually got a couple of things written down here just in case this conversation came up, but there's reductions in activity and an activity in a part of the brain called the amygdala, right? It's a tiny little part of the brain, right? So there's two sides of the amygdala. And this part of the brain is for emotional processing, and also it's our fear center of our brain. When there's reductions here, what do you think is going to happen? There's going to be less fear, less stress, right? And less likely to react to these things. And so by meditating, people experience these kinds of changes in the brain, physically, not just mentally. Physical changes in the brain will start to happen when people start doing mindfulness-based exercises, including meditation. And so these are just quite cool things to think about. So starting with something that's more simple, such as maybe like a 5-minute yoga practice, right? I remember I started in COVID, yoga with Adrian or something like that.
Who's
fantastic.
Adrian?
Adrian, I think it's Adrian or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Adrian.
it is Adrian. Yeah, yoga
Adrian.
with
Yeah.
It's
Was this a Bali thing? Okay.
No, it's a YouTube thing.
Oh, is it?
It's very popular on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And and like that, things like that are a great place to start. Another great place to start is an app called Headspace. I think for me, that was what kicked it off for me. They do some really great guided meditations. And so I honestly do guided meditations with my clients just to start with, right? And then over time, I teach them to start moving that into a practice, which can actually become more of a practice of learning how to act something out in the real world. So I teach something called noting. Noting is just a cognitive behavior therapy exercise, which is just the act of catching either a thought or a feeling. So if I'm out in the real world and I notice my mind starting to ruminate, I go, oh, that's thinking. If I'm out in the real world and I start to feel an uncomfortable feeling, I go, oh, that's a feeling. And all I'm doing is I'm just catching it. I'm not specifically saying that's a bad feeling, that's a good feeling, that's anxiety, that's happiness, whatever. I'm just going, oh, that's a feeling. And the idea is to, first of all, not make something, to put something on a pedestal and go, oh, this is bad, like really bad, or this is really good, because now all of a sudden I'm going to end up in a roller coaster of experiences and reactions. So the idea is to make everything a little bit more neutral, and it also gives me space between me and the experience. And so I can practice that in meditation by just meditating for a few minutes. And if a thought comes up, I go, oh, that's thinking. If a feeling comes up, I go, oh, that's feeling. And that's like a training ground, so that, and then when I go out into the real world, I'm more active with that practice of noting and can be more effective with it.
I really love how you like bring the science into it, but then also your personal experience, like how you answered earlier, and you're like, this is my experience and this is like what's worked for me. But then still kind of talking about the brain, because when you're talking about bias earlier, right, like what works for you isn't necessarily going to work for me, and multiple different people, like we all experience things differently. And from like a kind of self-awareness perspective, like for myself, it's actually like being out in nature which really supports me, like going for a walk, getting out amongst the trees, or just really being again in stillness, like in a similar way, but out in nature, like feeling the wind like on my body. And so like that there, it's kind of like that kind of connection to the land and the whenua, that really kind of supports me when it comes to that space of like overthinking. And so I really love that you kind of spoke about that, because I think this is like a big part of the reason why we're having these conversations, right? It's like, yes, there's things that work, but also like be open and curious to what works for you, and give things a try, and actually see what really sticks. What do I want to ask you? I'm like,
so many things.
I know we could go on for a while. Is there anything that you want to ask Emma, actually?
That I want to ask? I want to kind of dig more into your history with TBI, because I know that a lot of stress and anxiety obviously is an ongoing issue, specifically in Western world, I think.
Oh yeah.
But there is, and I say this knowing full well that this is the brain is an ongoing plethora of information that we're constantly developing and growing and whatever.
Mm.
And I I've got my own experiences with hydrocephalus. So I know that you don't know much about my story, but I was born with a relatively rare brain condition called hydrocephalus. So I had my first brain surgery when I was 4 months old, and by
Oh
the
my
time I
goodness.
was 12, I'd had 10 brain surgeries and 24 surgeries in total. And that was because of, I've got a cyst, a pillow of water in the middle of my brain, which squashes out the brain to the skull.
Okay.
Right. And
Okay. I
then,
see. Yeah.
so cerebral spinal fluid can get into my skull, but it had no way to exit. So I have a shunt or
Right.
tube going from my brain to my peritoneal cavity, my stomach, to drain out the excess brain fluid.
Okay.
And when that gets blocked, obviously pressure builds up. I get headaches that you're talking about, memory loss that you're talking about, nausea that I'm sure you've experienced,
Of course.
lack of being able to find the right words or remember things, or, directional memory still is to this day, 20 something years later, still kind of struggle with a little bit. Thank God for GPS. But,
Yeah.
the thing from me that I'm really excited about with with the neuroscience that's coming out, is that, and this is totally like, I don't mean this to sound egocentric at all, but when I did my TED talk a couple of years ago, there was a disclaimer saying that the science behind some of the things that I was talking about had not yet been proven enough. But you're talking about a lot of the things that I talk about in the TED talk, the ability to, calm down the amygdala, to make sure that we have that space to feel, to think, to find clarity. And I guess my question is more centered around: are there any practices beyond meditation that you and even walks in nature that you feel can really help people not just overcome stress and anxiety, but help to rebuild parts of that lost memory, rebuild parts of that, of that trauma? Obviously songwriting and music stimulate both parts of the brain, so that's a really effective one. But are there any things that you have found specifically to help you navigate getting your life back?
Yeah, great question. So firstly, let's just understand that the brain is ever changing. And what's really cool about learning about this is that, back in the day when neuroscience was first becoming a bigger thing, it was believed that brain development and changes in the brain, in other words, people hear this term neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is just the brain's ability to change, right? So when we learn something, it undergoes neuroplasticity, there's a change. Now, it was believed it would stop around 25 to 30 years old for people. Yeah. And now, of course, as of the last, I don't know how many decades now, they've realized, no, it continues all the way until old age. Of course, it's more difficult, more effort is required to create neuroplasticity, to learn. So you can teach an old dog new tricks. It just takes a while.
I love that. Yeah. Just proving that.
Yeah. And so, for me, for example, I had damage to an area of my brain in the front left area called the Broca's area of my brain. Now, this is responsible for speech production and the motor patterns of speech. And so what would happen is, I remember after my rugby incident, I would try to speak to people. They'd say something, I'd know what they said, I know what I want to say, but I couldn't communicate with my mouth to say it. And so I'd come out and I'll stutter, I'd stop talking, and then I'd just stop. And I wouldn't even know what I was going to say all of a sudden. And it was so frustrating and scary. But of course, after about a week or two, it started to recover. The problem is now is if I'm tired, I experience similar symptoms. Not as bad, but they start to come through. Or if I get another head knock, which I had, right, it will come through again. And so, that can happen. However, I recovered for the most part, right? And so I'm speaking quite well now. I think. Yeah. I'm pretty sure you guys can tell me. Okay.
We understand you.
So, yeah, okay. Well, that's enough for me. That's enough for me. And so some sort of change had to happen because those old damaged neurons didn't replenish or recover. But what happened is just new neurons grew, which is neurogenesis, so the growth and birth of new neurons. And so that happens, right? Well, like the brain's incredible. It will just create new pathways so that it can work around the damaged area, so that therefore I can learn how to speak again successfully, right? And it happens relatively quickly on the basic level, and then of course it just takes a lot longer to get all the complexes together. But that's fantastic. Now to talk about like how I went about that for myself. I went through a very similar process to actually what I just take my clients through. It's a very simple 5-step process, right? Fix sleep, right? Very straightforward, very important. Sleep's actually talked as the most important therapy of all, because it's a time where we consolidate experiences, emotions, thought patterns, and so forth. And if we're not getting quality sleep, there's enormous data out there, showing the correlation between poor sleep and anxiety, poor sleep and memory loss, poor sleep and lack of performance, right? Poor sleep and, of course, brain health, like poor brain health. And so the idea is, of course, to improve recovery from things like concussions or just general mental health at all, improve sleep. And one of the best ways to do that is just simply learn how to go to bed and wake up at the same time most days. That's actually one of the simplest things to do, to start there. And if one's not getting to sleep, my favorite supplement is magnesium L-threonate, right? It's a form of magnesium that can get past the blood-brain barrier, right? Most magnesium forms just stay in the body. And so for me, that is a fantastic way to improve my sleep, right?
I'm giggling because I thought you were going to say my favorite supplement is nanonaps, but okay, carry on.
That's my second favorite supplement, actually. That's my second favorite. I do nanonaps most days. I'm not kidding. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny, there's recent research that now suggests that napping frequently throughout the week can also help with heart health and cardiovascular health, preventing heart attack later in life. Sorry, carry on. Tip number 4.
I'm big on
number
that.
2, rather.
I'm big on that, yeah. Well, the second step is learning how to self-regulate. And so that can be anything, right? So for me, it was, meditation and also breath work. And so, learning a simple breathwork technique, like learning how to exhale longer than you inhale. Very simple. You don't have to do anything fancy. It's just breathing in through the nose to the degree you can. And then like you're blowing through a straw, like as long as you can, exhaling. And that slow exhale decreases heart rate, and it slows down, therefore, the rate at which blood flow is occurring and the stress hormone is moving around your body. And so the slowing of stress, the slowing of heart rate helps one to regulate themselves quite quickly. And so just doing that 3 to 6 times of just slowly exhaling helped me to regulate myself. And that's a really easy way to self-regulate. And then the third is learning how to understand my triggers, right? Simple journaling exercise you can do, just simply brainstorm 5 minutes, write down what are my major triggers? What are the main things that cause me anxiety today, right? And the 4th step, understanding the cause. What's the cause of these? Where are they coming from, right? If one meditates or does some sort of self-awareness exercise, they can learn to unpack those. And the 5th step is, as I learn to, navigate those and figure those out, is actually to start working on other lifestyle factors, such as my diet, right? So for me, ideally, I just try to stick to at least 80% whole foods, right? Very straightforward. Physical activity. I try to get some level of aerobic exercise and physical activity. Endorphins are really good for you, of course, but also as well, it improves blood flow to the brain, so it helps with recovery. Learning, I find feeling like I'm progressing in some way, shape, or form, whether it's educational or personal development, right? Learning about myself or about neuroscience, because I love neuroscience, and also, of course, mindfulness practices. So I feel like developing a good array of healthy lifestyle factors helps a lot there. So that's been really helpful for me.
I love it. And of course, we've run completely out of time because I would like to just stay on this call forever. But unfortunately, we have come to an end. Kieran, what's the best way for people to reach out to you to learn more about your anxiety coaching and, your studies as you're diving deeper into the neuroscience?
Yeah, sure. So Coach Keza. Oh, sorry, no, that's my old one. NeuroKez. I changed it. Since my main focus is neuroscience. And honestly, I'm I'm not really a pushy coach. So if anyone wants to message me with any questions, I'm happy to answer them without trying to push you into any coaching or anything like that. I'm not that kind of person. And also my main focus is neuroscience now. So happy to answer any questions if anyone has anything about that. But NeuroKez on Instagram.
And that's NeuroKeza with Kezza or ZZA?
Just KEZ.
The KEZ? Okay, Coach Kez.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Gotcha. I was laughing to somebody the other day about they just they heard the Keza thing as I was, talking about this upcoming conversation. Like, Keza, where's that from? And I was like, well, we also have Shazza and Bazza, and it's an ongoing thing in New Zealand. Yeah.
It is. Wow.
Cool. We'll put all those details in the description of this podcast. Thank you so much for your insights and time, Kieran. I'm super excited about your work, and we'll be definitely following you for to get more information as your studies and your coaching progresses. And I'm just really grateful for your time.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. It's been nice to just see your face and hear a little bit more about how you've been doing. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you so much, Ra. I really appreciate this. It was such a pleasure. It really was.
Of course. And everybody watching, again, I'll be putting those description notes in the description of this video. If you have any questions, comments, insults, don't insult us. Be nice. Until next week, friends, be good, be kind, spread love. And remember, my book's coming out in just over a month. I'm so excited. Here it is. Mental Health Sounds Like This. Ra, your next book's coming up soon, right?
It is, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
It is. I'm excited about it. You are more than enough, the follow-up to my first book. So
I love it.
We're in the final stages of just finishing it.
Love that.
Beautiful.
Awesome, friends. Be good, be kind. Spread love like it's going out of fashion, because if we're not careful, it will be. Until next week. Peace.